Azam. The headline read, "Local Woman, S Act of Kindness Leads to Unexpected Romance with Jewelry Tycoon." Jennifer Garcia rolled her eyes at the tabloid her best friend had dramatically slapped on her kitchen counter. "This is ridiculous, Meg. They make it sound like I orchestrated the whole thing, like I strategically chose to help Mrs. Abernathy that day, just to trap her nephew into falling for me." She crumpled the paper and tossed it into the recycling bin. If only the journalists knew how close she'd come to missing her bus that rainy Tuesday morning, how she'd almost walked right past the elderly woman struggling with her umbrella outside the pharmacy. One small decision: to stop and help, instead of hurrying by, had changed everything. "But you have to admit it is kind of a fairy tale," Meg insisted, fishing the paper back out. "Would random woman help sweet old lady who turns out to be related to one of San Francisco's most eligible bachelors? Come on, that S straight out of a movie." Jennifer sighed, turning back to her laptop, where half a dozen unfinished manuscripts cluttered her desktop. Her writing career wasn't exactly taking off, and the last thing she needed was to become gossip fodder for the city S-board socialites. "Thomas doesn't even know I exist," Jennifer said, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "I helped his aunt to her Dr. A.S. appointment. He sent flowers as a thank you, end of story." She didn't to mention the handwritten note that had accompanied those flowers, the one she'd read so many times the creases were starting to wear thin. "Some people still have kind hearts in this world. I'd like to thank you properly sometime." What Thomas Martin didn't to know, what nobody knew except Meg, was that Jennifer had actually met him before, 5 years ago, at a gallery opening downtown. She'd been catering the event, trying to make ends meet while pursuing her writing dreams, and he'd been the handsome stranger who'd spent 20 minutes discussing Ernest Hemingway with her by the champagne fountain. She doubted he'd remember, people like Thomas Martin, heir to the Martin jewelry empire, met hundreds of people every month. "Well, you were about to get your chance to remind him," Meg said with a sly smile, sliding an embossed envelope across the counter. "In fact, Mrs. Abernathy called while you were in the shower. She invited you to join her creative writing workshop at the community center. Apparently, her nephew teaches it." Jennifer's heart skipped. "You're kidding." "Nope," she said, and I quote, "That lovely girl who helped me deserves to have her stories heard, and Thomas is an excellent teacher." Meg's grin widened. "Class starts tomorrow at 7. Jennifer stared at the invitation, her mind racing. After years of rejection letters and stalled manuscripts, was this the universe finally throwing her a bone? Or was it setting her up for an even bigger disappointment? "I can just show up," she protested weakly. "It'll look like I'm stalking him or something." "Or," Meg countered, "it'll look like you, a writer attending a writing workshop, which is exactly what you are. Besides, Mrs. Abernathy obviously wants you there." Jennifer bit her lip. The truth was she could use the guidance. Her latest rejection had cut deep. "Your characters lack authentic emotional depth," the editor had written. "Maybe a fresh perspective would help." "Fine," she relented, "but I'm going for the workshop, not for Thomas Martin." "Sure, honey," Meg said, patting her hand. "Whatever you say." The next evening, Jennifer stood outside the community center clutching her laptop bag, second-guessing everything from her outfit, casual but professional, she hoped, to her decision to come at all. Through the windows, she could see a circle of chairs filled with eager faces, and there he was, Thomas Martin, looking even more handsome than she remembered, gesturing animatedly as he spoke to the class. Before she could change her mind, the door swung open, and Mrs. Abernathy appeared, her face lighting up. "Jennifer, dear, I was beginning to worry you wouldn't to come. Thomas has been so looking forward to meeting the angel who rescued his old auntie." "Joe, I didn't to rescue," Jennifer began, but Mrs. Abernathy was already pulling her inside. "Thomas, darling," the older woman called out. "She is here, the wonderful girl I told you about." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Jennifer. Thomas looked up, his expression shifting from polite interest to something else: recognition, surprise. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, their eyes locked, and Jennifer saw it. He remembered her. "The Hemingway girl." "He," said softly, and Jennifer felt her world tilt on its axis. "Aye, you remember me," Jennifer stammered, aware that the entire workshop was watching their exchange with undisguised curiosity. Thomas's smile deepened, creating a dimple in his left cheek that hadn't been featured in any of the magazine spreads Meg had enthusiastically shown her. Hard to forget someone who argues that the old man and the sea is overrated while eating 3 canapes in one bite. Heat rushed to Jennifer's cheeks. Of course that S-what-he-d, remember, her shoving fancy appetizers into her mouth, while criticizing one of the most celebrated novels in American literature. Perfect. "Thomas, you know each other." Mrs. Abernathy looked delighted, her eyes darting between them with obvious approval. "We met briefly at the Westmore Gallery opening," Thomas explained, saving Jennifer from having to admit she'd been part of the catering staff. Jennifer had some fascinating insights on modernist literature. The way he said her name, like he'd been keeping it safe somewhere, sent a flutter through her chest. But reality quickly reasserted itself when one of the workshop participants, a sleek blonde, wearing what Jennifer recognized as a Martin jewelry signature necklace, cleared her throat pointedly. "Thomas, we were discussing the importance of authentic dialogue," the woman said, her tone suggesting she found the interruption anything but authentic. "Right you are, Vivian. Please, Jennifer, take a seat." Thomas gestured to an empty chair directly across from him. "We are exploring how dialogue reveals character." Jennifer slid into the seat, hyper-aware of Mrs. Abernathy's pleased expression as she settled beside her. The next hour passed in a blur as Thomas led the group through exercises designed to strengthen dialogue writing. He was a gifted teacher, Jennifer had to admit, offering insightful feedback without crushing spirits. Occasionally their eyes would meet, and she'd feel that same jolt of connection. When the workshop concluded, Jennifer gathered her things, intending to make a quick exit. She needed time to process the evening, to figure out what it meant. That Thomas remembered her after all these years. "Jennifer, wait!" His voice stopped her at the door. The other participants filtered past, several giving her curious glances. Vivian's gaze was particularly sharp as she swept by, diamond earrings catching the light. Thomas approached, looking slightly uncertain, an expression Jennifer wouldn't have expected from someone whose face regularly appeared on most influential under-40 lists. "I wanted to thank you properly for helping Aunt Eleanor," he said. "Oh, she means the world to me." "Anyone would have done the same," Jennifer replied, though they both knew that wasn't it true, not in a city where most people move through their days barely looking up from their phones. "Not anyone," Thomas countered, "and not with such kindness. Aunt Eleanor said you not only got her to the doctor, but waited with her through the entire appointment and made sure she got home safely." Jennifer shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "She reminded me of my grandmother." Something shifted in Thomas's expression, a softening, a recognition of shared values. "Would you—" he hesitated, then seemed to make up his mind. "Would you join me for coffee? There's a place around the corner that stays open late. I'd love to hear what you were working on." Every rational part of Jennifer's brain screamed that this was a terrible idea. Men like Thomas Martin didn't date women like her, women who lived in cramped apartments with roommates, who survived on ramen between freelance gigs, who'd been rejected by 17 literary agents, but who was counting. "I should really get home," she said, the responsible answer. Please, he said, and the surprising vulnerability in that single word undid her. Okay, just coffee. Ooh. The cafe was a small, intimate space with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls, not at all where she'd expected someone like Thomas to frequent. As they settled at a corner table with their drinks, cappuccino for him, chai latte for her, Jennifer found herself relaxing. "Oh, so," Thomas began, "Aunt Eleanor mentioned you'd be a writer." "Aspiring writer," Jennifer corrected. "Nothing published yet." "What do you write?" "Contemporary fiction, stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances." She took a sip of her chai to hide her nervousness. "What about you? How does a jewelry magnate end up teaching creative writing workshops?" Something flickered across his face. Annoyance? Resignation? There's more to me than the family business, despite what the tabloids might suggest. I didn't mean... No, I know, he said quickly. It is just... Everyone assumes they know me because they've seen my name in headlines or my face in magazines. He leaned forward, his eyes, a striking shade of green she hadn't fully appreciated before, intent on hers. "The truth is, I've been writing since I was a kid. Published a few short stories under a pen name. The workshop is my escape from board meetings and charity galas." Jennifer felt a pang of guilt for having made the same assumptions as everyone else. "I'd love to read your work sometime," she said sincerely. "Maybe someday," he replied with a small smile. "If you'll share yours with me." So the conversation flowed easily after that, jumping from favorite authors to writing processes to the strangest places they found inspiration. Jennifer discovered that Thomas was not only well-read, but genuinely passionate about storytelling, with strong opinions and a self-deprecating humor that surprised her. She found herself forgetting who he was supposed to be and simply enjoying who he actually was. When the cafe owner reluctantly informed them it was closing time, Jennifer was shocked to discover 3 hours had passed. They lingered outside, on the sidewalk, both seemingly reluctant to end the evening. "Can I see you again?" Thomas asked, his breath visible in the cool night air. "Outside of the workshop, I mean." Before Jennifer could answer, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb and a suited driver stepped out. "Mr. Martin, your father called. He is expecting you at the benefit dinner." The magic of the evening dissipated as reality crashed back. This was Thomas Martin's world, drivers and benefits and responsibilities, not spontaneous coffee dates with struggling writers. "I have to go," Thomas said, regret evident in his voice. "But please, think about it." As the car pulled away, Jennifer stood on the sidewalk, feeling as though she had just woken from a particularly vivid dream. Her phone buzzed with a text from Meg. How was the workshop? Did Prince Charming remember Cinderella? Jennifer stared at the message, then at the taillights of Thomas's car, disappearing around the corner. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," she typed back. He actually said that? The Hemingway girl? Meg perched on the edge of Jennifer's bed the next morning, wide-eyed with disbelief. "That S straight out of a romance novel." Jennifer groaned, pulling a pillow over her face. "It doesn't matter. Nothing is going to come of it." "Why not? He asked to see you again." "Because," Jennifer said, her voice muffled by the pillow, "he lives on a different planet. Did you know he had to leave for a benefit dinner last night at 11 p.m.? Who does that?" "Rich people," Meg said, as if it were obvious. "So what? He is still human." Jennifer lowered the pillow, fixing her friend with a serious look. "Meg, I've had my heart broken enough times by guys who were on the same socio-economic level as me. I don't need to aim higher for an even more spectacular crash. But what if... No what ifs." Jennifer swung her legs over the side of the bed. "I'm going to the workshop for the writing guidance. That was it. In fact, I should work on the piece I am submitting for critique next week." Meg looked like she wanted to argue, but instead sighed dramatically. Fine, be responsible and boring. But when you carry 80 and full of regrets, don't it say I didn't to warn you? I'll put it in my will, Jennifer promised dryly. She spent the rest of the day alternating between staring at her laptop screen and checking her phone, which remained stubbornly silent. Not that she expected Thomas to text. She hadn't even given him her number. Still, each passing hour reinforced her conviction that last night had been an anomaly, a brief intersection of their otherwise parallel lives. By evening, she'd managed to produce exactly 2 paragraphs of her submission piece, both of which she hated. Frustrated, she decided to clear her head with a walk. San Francisco's brisk autumn air always helped her think. She was 3 blocks from her apartment when her phone finally buzzed. Her heart leapt, then immediately settled when she saw it was from an unknown number. Jennifer, this is Eleanor Abernathy. I hope you don't mind, but Thomas asked for your number. I told him to call you himself, but he's being uncharacteristically shy. Would you be a dear and put him out of his misery? His number is 415-5555-0189. Jennifer stopped walking, staring at the message in disbelief. Thomas Martin, shy, about contacting her. It seemed impossible, yet Mrs. Abernathy had no reason to lie. Before she could overthink it, she saved the number and typed a message. Hi, Thomas. It's Jennifer. Your aunt seems to think you wanted to reach me. She hit send before she could change her mind, then continued walking, trying not to check her phone every 5 seconds. She'd have barely gone another block when it buzzed again. Jennifer, I was just thinking about you. Aunt Eleanor has no subtlety, but I'm grateful for her interference. Are you free tomorrow evening? I'd like to show you something. Jennifer bit her lip, torn between excitement and caution. What kind of something? The reply came quickly. It's a surprise, but I promise it's writing-related, and in a public place, if that's a concern. She appreciated that he'd considered how his invitation might come across. Okay, I'm intrigued. What time? They arranged to meet at 7 p.m. outside the San Francisco Public Library. Jennifer tried to tell herself it wasn't a date, just 2 writers connecting over their shared passion, but she still changed her outfit 3 times before leaving her apartment the next evening. Thomas was waiting on the library steps, dressed more casually than she'd seen him yet, jeans and a navy sweater that made his eyes look even greener. He smiled when he saw her, a genuine smile that created those appealing crinkles around his eyes. You came, he said, sounding relieved. I am a writer. You promised something writing-related. How could I resist? He laughed, the sound warm in the cool evening air. Fair enough. Shall we? He gestured toward the library entrance. We were going inside. I thought they closed at 6 on Sundays. They do for the general public. There was a hint of mischief in his smile. But the Martin Foundation funds their literacy programs, so occasionally I get after-hours access. Of course he did. Jennifer tried not to let her expression reveal her discomfort with these casual reminders of the gulf between their worlds. Thomas led her through the darkened library to a service elevator, which took them to a floor Jennifer had never visited. When the doors opened, she gasped. They were in a special collections room, and displayed under protective glass were original manuscripts and first editions of some of the greatest works in American literature. The library is preparing a new exhibit on the evolution of the American novel, Thomas explained, watching her face. I thought you might enjoy a preview. This is incredible, Jennifer breathed, moving toward a handwritten manuscript page from The Great Gatsby. Fitzgerald's elegant scrawl covered the page, with crossed-out lines and margin notes offering insight into his creative process. For the next hour, they moved from display to display, discussing the works and their impact. Thomas was knowledgeable without being pretentious, and Jennifer found herself sharing theories and observations she'd never articulated to anyone before. He listened attentively, challenging her when he disagreed, but in a way that made her thinking sharper rather than shutting her down. You know, he said as they examined a first edition of Their Eyes Were Watching God, you have a unique perspective. Have you ever considered writing literary criticism? Jennifer laughed. That requires people to care what I think about books. I care, he said simply, and the straightforwardness of it caught her off guard. Their eyes met over the display case, and something electric passed between them. Thomas took a half-step closer, then seemed to think better of it. There is one more thing I want to show you. He led her to a small reading room where a table had been set up with wine, cheese, and 2 leather-bound books. I thought we could toast to good literature, he said, pouring 2 glasses of red wine. And I wanted to give you something. He handed her one of the books. It was a beautiful first edition of To Kill a Mockingbird. Thomas, I can't accept this. It must be worth it. It is not from the collection, he assured her. It is from my personal library. It was the book that made me want to be a writer when I was 12, and I've always believed important. Books should be shared. Jennifer ran her fingers over the embossed title, deeply touched by the gesture. Thank you. I'll treasure it. There is something else. He handed her the second book, which she realized with a start was a thin volume of short stories. The author was listed as T.M. Abbott. Your pen name, she guessed, looking up at him. He nodded, suddenly appearing nervous. No one in my family knows I write, except Aunt Eleanor. My father would consider it a distraction from the business. Why tell me then? Jennifer asked softly. Thomas took a deep breath. Because with you, I don't feel like Thomas Martin, heir to the Martin jewelry empire. I just feel like me, a writer who struggles with dialogue and overuses semicolons. Jennifer smiled, understanding perfectly. I promise not to tell anyone about the semicolons. That would ruin your reputation beyond repair. He laughed, relaxing visibly, and raised his glass. To finding people who see us as we really are. I'll drink to that, Jennifer said, clinking her glass against his. As they sipped their wine and discussed the stories in his collection, Jennifer felt something shifting inside her, a wall coming down, a possibility opening up. Maybe, just maybe, their worlds were not as far apart as she'd thought. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of workshop sessions, late-night conversations, and a growing connection that Jennifer both welcomed and feared. Thomas had surprised her in countless ways, by remembering her coffee order, by texting her, random writing prompts in the middle of the day, by showing up at her favorite bookstore, by coincidence, when she mentioned she'd be there. What he hadn't done was kiss her, though there had been moments, many moments, when it seemed he might. Each time, something held him back, and Jennifer was beginning to wonder if she'd misread his interest entirely. He is being respectful, or Meg insisted when Jennifer voiced her doubts, or maybe he's scared too. What does Thomas Martin have to be scared of? Jennifer asked skeptically. The same thing you are, getting hurt, Meg said with unexpected insight. Just because he's rich doesn't mean he is emotionally invincible. The idea that Thomas might be as uncertain as she was provided a strange comfort. Still, Jennifer couldn't shake the feeling that something remained unresolved between them, a conversation they needed to have but were both avoiding. That conversation was forced upon them sooner than expected. Jennifer arrived at the workshop one evening to find the room buzzing with excitement, and for once it wasn't tea about Thomas. A renowned literary agent, Marissa Wells, would be visiting as a special guest. She's looking for new voices in contemporary fiction, Mrs. Abernathy whispered to Jennifer as they took their seats. Thomas specifically asked her to come. Isn't that wonderful? Jennifer felt a conflicting rush of emotions: gratitude that Thomas would arrange such an opportunity, anxiety about presenting her work to an actual agent, and a nagging discomfort that he hadn't mentioned it to her beforehand. When Thomas arrived with Miss Wells, he caught Jennifer's eye and gave her a small, encouraging nod. The workshop proceeded as usual, with everyone sharing excerpts from their works in progress. When it was Jennifer's turn, she read a passage from her novel about a woman discovering her deceased mother as hidden correspondence, revealing a life she never knew her mother had lived. The room fell silent when she finished reading. Miss Wells was the first to speak. "That was extraordinarily moving, Miss Garcia. You've captured grief and discovery with remarkable sensitivity. I'd love to see the complete manuscript when it's ready." A chorus of congratulations erupted around her, but Jennifer barely heard them. She was looking at Thomas, whose face reflected pride, but also something else: apprehension. After the workshop, as people clustered around Ms. Wells, Thomas approached Jennifer. "Walk with me?" he asked quietly. They slipped out into the cool evening air, walking in silence for a block before Thomas spoke. "I should have told you about Marissa coming." "Yes, you should have," Jennifer agreed, her earlier discomfort resurfacing. "Why didn't you?" Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his agitation. "I was afraid you'd think I was interfering, or worse, that you'd think I was using my connections to—" He broke off, frustration evident. "To what, Thomas?" "To buy your affection," he finished, the words coming out in a rush. "On my entire life, people have wanted to be close to me because of what I could do for them, what doors I could open. I wanted you to like me for me, not for what I could offer you professionally." Jennifer stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "Is that what you think of me, that I'd be that calculating?" "No!" Thomas looked genuinely distressed. "That is not what I meant. I've never felt this way about anyone before, and I am terrified of messing it up." The admission hung in the air between them, finally spoken aloud. Jennifer's heart raced as she processed his words. "And how exactly do you feel?" she asked, needing to hear it clearly. Thomas took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Like I've been writing the same character my whole life, waiting for someone real to match her. And suddenly, there you are. Like every conversation with you makes me see the world differently. Like I am falling in love with you, Jennifer, and it scares the hell out of me." The words hit her with physical force, joy and fear colliding in her chest. "It scares me too," she admitted. "Your world is so different from mine." "My world," Thomas repeated, a trace of bitterness in his voice. "Do you know what my world is really like? Constant expectations, family legacy weighing on every decision, people who pretend to know me based on magazine profiles." He took her hands in his. "When I am with you, none of that exists. You are the most real thing in my life." Jennifer wanted desperately to believe him, to give in to the feelings she'd been fighting, but a lifetime of practical caution held her back. "And what happens when reality intrudes? When your family expects you to marry someone like Vivian? When the tabloids start speculating about your charity case girlfriend? Is that what you think you are to me?" Thomas looked genuinely hurt. "A charity case? No, but—" Jennifer gestured helplessly. "That is how it would look. The struggling writer and the jewelry heir. It is a cliché for a reason, Thomas." "I don't to give a damn how it looks," he said fiercely, "and neither should you. My family." Before he could finish, his phone rang. He glanced at it and grimaced. "It is my father. I need to take this." Jennifer nodded, watching as he stepped away to answer. From his tense posture and clipped responses, she could tell the news wasn't good. When he returned, his expression was grim. "I have to go," he said. "There's an issue with our new collection launch. My father needs me at the office." "Of course," Jennifer said, trying to mask her disappointment. Thomas hesitated, clearly torn. "We're not finished with this conversation," he said firmly. "Promise me you'll let me explain when I am not in crisis mode." I promise," Jennifer said, though part of her wondered if this interruption wasn't the universe's way of showing her exactly what a relationship with Thomas would be like, constantly sidelined by the demands of his other life. He squeezed her hand briefly before hurrying away, leaving Jennifer alone with her thoughts and the night wind whipping around her. When she arrived home, Meg was waiting up, eager for details. "Well, did the agent love your work? Did Thomas finally make a move?" "Yes to the first, complicated on the second," Jennifer said, collapsing onto the couch. She recounted the evening's events, ending with Thomas's interrupted declaration. "So he actually said he's falling in love with you," Meg summarized. "And your response was to point out all the reasons it won't work?" Put that way, Jennifer felt a twinge of regret. "I was being realistic." No, you were being scared," Meg corrected. "Which I get. It is a big leap. But Jen, what if this is it? What if he's your person?" "My person wouldn't he have a family empire and societal expectations that I could never fit into?" Jennifer argued weakly. "Your person is whoever makes you feel most like yourself," Meg countered. "And from what you've told me, that's exactly what Thomas does for you." Jennifer had no answer for that. She went to bed with her mind still racing, torn between hope and fear, between what her heart wanted and what her practical mind insisted was impossible. The next morning, she woke to a text from Thomas. "Need to go to NYC for emergency meetings. Back Thursday. Can we talk then?" I meant every word. "I said last night." Jennifer stared at the message, reality sinking in. This was Thomas's life. Last-minute trips across the country, business emergencies, responsibilities she could hardly imagine. Could she really fit into that world? More importantly, did she want to? She typed and deleted 3 different responses, before finally sending "Safe travels. We'll talk Thursday." Then she did the only thing she knew how to do when her emotions became too tangled to unravel. She opened her laptop and began to write. "Speaking of writing," Thomas said, suddenly looking nervous again, "there is something else I wanted to talk to you about. Marissa Wells called me yesterday. By Thursday, Jennifer had written more than she had in months. Her characters, previously stuck in emotional limbo, suddenly had urgent desires and fears that propelled the story forward." Meg had remarked that heartache was always good for creativity, to which Jennifer had thrown a pillow at her head. She hadn't heard from Thomas since his departure text, which was both a relief and a torment. Part of her hoped he'd take these days to reconsider, to realize that their worlds were simply too different to merge. Another part, the part that made her chest ache when she thought of never seeing him again, prayed for the opposite. The guy workshop that evening would be their first opportunity to talk, and Jennifer arrived early, nerves making her jumpy. Mrs. Abernathy was already there, arranging chairs. "Jennifer, dear, just the person I wanted to see." The older woman looked particularly pleased with herself. Thomas called from the airport. His flight's delayed, so he won to make the workshop, but he asked if you'd meet him afterward. 9:00 at Lighthouse Point. Jennifer's stomach flip-flopped. Lighthouse Point? That's a bit dramatic for a conversation, isn't it? Mrs. Abernathy's eyes twinkled. "That boy always did have a flair for the theatrical, even as a child. But between us," she leaned closer, "I think he wants privacy for whatever he plans to say to you." The implication made Jennifer's cheeks warm. "Did he tell you what happened between us?" "He didn't have to, dear. I've known my nephew his entire life. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you, like you at Ria. First edition he's just discovered." She patted Jennifer's hand. "Now, shall we get this workshop started? Ms. Wells asked specifically about your manuscript progress." The workshop passed in a blur. Jennifer answered questions about her novel on autopilot, her mind fixed on what awaited her at Lighthouse Point. When 9:00's clock approached, she made her excuses and slipped away, her heart pounding harder with each step toward the waterfront. Lighthouse Point was beautiful at night, the historic lighthouse casting a rhythmic beam across the bay. The moon hung low over the water, creating a silver path across the gentle waves. It was deserted, except for a solitary figure standing near. The railing, Thomas, his back to her as he gazed out at the water. "Thomas!" she called softly. He turned, and the expression on his face, hope mingled with uncertainty, made her breath catch. "You came," he said, echoing his words from the library night. "I promised we'd talk." Jennifer moved to stand beside him at the railing, keeping a careful distance between them. For a moment, they both watched the moonlight on the water, gathering their thoughts. "I've been thinking about what you said," Thomas began. "About our different worlds." Jennifer tensed, preparing herself for what she assumed would be a gentle letdown. "And you were right," he continued. "They are different, incompatibly different, in fact." Despite having expected this, the words still stung. "I understand," she said quietly. "No, I don't think you do." Thomas turned to face her fully. "I realized something in New York. My world, as we've been calling it, the galas and board meetings and family expectations, it has never been my choice. It is a role I've played because I thought I had to." Jennifer blinked, confused by the direction this was taking. "I told my father I am stepping back from the company," Thomas said, the words rushing out as if he'd been holding them in. "Not completely. I still have responsibilities to the employees and our legacy. But I am establishing boundaries. No more dropping everything for emergencies that aren't actually emergencies. No more letting the business dictate every aspect of my life." "Thomas, you didn't have to." "I did," he interrupted gently. "For me, not just for you. Being away these past few days, surrounded by all the trappings of the Thomas Martin everyone thinks they know, I was miserable, because that person isn't me. The real me is the person who debates Hemingway with catering staff and teaches writing workshops and falls in love with women who challenge him to be authentic." Jennifer's heart stuttered at the word love again. "Your family must be thrilled," she said dryly, trying to mask her emotional response. Thomas laughed, a genuine sound that lightened the moment. "My father thinks I am having a quarter-life crisis. My mother is secretly relieved. She's always thought I worked too hard. And Aunt Eleanor," he smiled fondly, "well, she is taking full credit for introducing me to the woman who finally knocked some sense into that stubborn head." Jennifer couldn't help but smile at that. It sounded exactly like Mrs. Abernathy. "The point is," Thomas continued, stepping closer, "I don't want you to fit into my world. I want to build a new one with you, one that has room for both our passions, both our dreams." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn book. "Do you know what this is?" Jennifer peered at it in the dim light. "Is that a passport?" "My first one, from when I was 18. I'd saved up from summer jobs, yes, I did have those, and planned a year of traveling and writing before college. My father found out and convinced me it was irresponsible, that I had obligations to the family business." He opened the passport, showing pages devoid of stamps. "I never used it. It has been sitting in my desk drawer for 12 years as a reminder of the road not taken." He handed it to her. "I am done letting fear make my decisions. I want to write my own story, Jennifer, and I want you in it, not as a supporting character, but as a co-author." Jennifer stared at the passport in her hands, understanding The symbolism of what he was offering, not just his heart, but a promise of shared adventures, of a life defined by their own choices rather than external expectations. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely audible above the sound of the waves. "Not of your world or even of disappointing your family. I'm scared of how much I feel for you already. What if we try this and it falls apart?" "What if it doesn't?" Thomas countered. He took her hands in his, the passport pressed between their palms. "I am not asking for forever tonight. I am just asking for a chance to see where this goes, page by page." Jennifer looked up at him. This man who had upended his life partly because of her, who saw her not as she was, but as she could be. The moonlight caught in his eyes, reflecting the same vulnerability and hope she felt in her own heart. "Nod, page." "By page," she repeated softly, a smile beginning to curve her lips. "I think I'd like that." Thomas's smile was radiant as he closed the distance between them. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle but sure. "May I?" he whispered. Jennifer nodded, her heart pounding as he leaned in. When his lips finally met hers, the world around them seemed to still. It wasn't the dramatic, sweeping kiss of a romance novel. It was better, real, a promise and a beginning wrapped into one perfect moment. When they pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Jennifer couldn't help but laugh. "I can't believe Mrs. Abernathy orchestrated this whole scenic moonlit confession." "Actually," Thomas admitted with a sheepish grin, "I picked this spot because it's where I wrote the ending of my first short story. It felt symbolically appropriate." "That is even more romantic," Jennifer said, her fingers intertwining with his. The writer finding his muse. Stop talking about your manuscript pages." Jennifer tensed slightly. "Thomas, if you pulled strings—" "I didn't," he assured her quickly. "I merely introduced you. Your talent did the rest." "She wants to represent you, Jennifer. She thinks your book has tremendous potential." The news was so unexpected that Jennifer could only stare at him. "Are you serious?" "Completely, but there is a catch." His expression turned serious. "She wants the full manuscript in 6 weeks." 6 weeks? Jennifer gasped. "That's impossible. I'd need to write practically day and night to finish it by then." Thomas squeezed her hand. "Which is why I've arranged to take a 2-month sabbatical from the company. If you want, I can help, not with the writing itself, but with everything else. Making sure you eat, providing feedback, keeping Meg from distracting you with gossip." His eyes twinkled. "Consider me your personal writing assistant." The gesture was so thoughtful, so perfectly aligned with what she truly needed, that Jennifer felt tears spring to her eyes. "You'd do that for me?" "For us?" Thomas corrected gently. "Your success is part of our story now. Besides," he added with a playful smile, "when you re a best-selling author, I can tell everyone I knew you when." Jennifer laughed through her tears. "Pretty sure that's supposed to be my line about you." Thomas pulled her close, pressing, a kiss to her forehead. "We'll just have to succeed together then. Deal?" "Deal," Jennifer agreed, standing on tiptoe to seal their agreement with another kiss. Epilogue, 1 year later. And the author will be signing copies immediately following the Q&A session. Please join me in welcoming Jennifer Garcia. The applause filled the bookstore as Jennifer approached the podium, her heart racing as she looked out at the packed room. Her debut novel, The Letters We Never Sent, had been released just 3 weeks ago to critical acclaim and surprisingly strong sales. This was her 4th signing event, but the nerves hadn't quite subsided yet. As she adjusted the microphone, her eyes found Thomas in the back row. He winked at her, his proud smile giving her the boost of confidence she needed. Next to him sat Mrs.